Well, thank you, everyone, for tuning into our program today. You may know that Family Talk is a listener-supported program, and we remain on the air by your generosity, literally. If you can help us financially, we would certainly appreciate it. God's blessings to you all.
That's right, Dr. Dobson. And friend, thanks to generous listeners like you, Family Talk can reach more and more listeners with practical help and encouragement. To support Family Talk with your best gift, go online to drjamesdobson.org or call 877-732-6825.
Today on Family Talk.
In Matthew 25, Jesus commanded his followers to care for the sick, poor, and destitute, and he warned that to neglect these needy people is really rejecting Christ himself. Hello, everyone. I'm Roger Marsh, and you are listening to Family Talk. This radio program is produced in part of the new James Dobson Family Institute. Today on the broadcast, you're going to hear a fascinating conversation Dr. Dobson had with Mike Yankoski. Back in the early 2000s, he felt God pushing him to minister to homeless people in America. So Mike decided to live on the streets to better see the needs of these overlooked individuals. He recounts the stories of his travels in his book called Under the Overpass. Today, he explains to Dr. Dobson what it was like to literally beg for money and food. He also talks about the different interactions he had with pedestrians and other homeless people. Let's listen now to the first part of his interview with Dr. James Dobson on this edition of Family Talk.
2 years ago, you were starting to think about what became this book. You didn't set out to write this book, but you had read another book that planted the idea. What was that book?
Well, actually, having read Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin, there was a lot of correlation between that. But it was interesting. It was actually about 3 years ago that the idea came while sitting in a church service and realizing that I was being quite hypocritical with my life. And compared to what the pastor was saying, which was a sermon about Christians living the Christian life, I actually found myself falling asleep and not paying very much attention to it. But woke up and started thinking, my gosh, what would it look like to go and become homeless, to understand more of what these 3 or 4 million men and women are faced with every day across the streets of America.
And that's what you set out to do, to find out who those people are, how they live, what they need, and what that experience of being homeless is about.
That's exactly right.
And so how does one go about doing that? Well, I mean, there were some preparatory steps that you had to take.
Absolutely. There was a lot of preparation that went into it. Actually, setting off in this, after January of my freshman year, the idea came, but then realized nothing about the streets. I know nothing about what's going on there already. I have to find out more about this. So over the course of the next year and a half, did a lot of research, read a lot of books, and actually began volunteering in a local rescue mission in order to find out more about the men and the women who are there. Who are these people that make their lives on the streets of America?
Yeah. You talked to your parents about the possibility.
Yeah.
I assume they weren't thrilled about the idea.
Absolutely not. We're not very excited about it at all.
It could be dangerous being out there.
Quite dangerous. You're exactly right. And I don't have the gift of being very subtle. I called them on the telephone and was like, hey, I got this great idea. I'm going to go be homeless. And sort of silence on the other end. And we'll talk about this later. That's how that conversation went.
Yeah, you know, parents, myself included, like to brag. My son, the physician, my son, the lawyer, my daughter, the whatever. Being able to tell your neighbors my son is homeless is not something that I think would thrill them a great deal.
Not typically, no. It was interesting to see how those conversations did go as the story started to go around the neighborhood.
Now, you didn't want to go alone, and you thought you really ought to have a partner. How'd you go about finding one?
Absolutely. Well, actually went on a search to try and find another guy to do this with. I mean, Jesus sends out his disciples 2 by 2, and just logistically, for there to be another person with whom I was traveling made it a whole lot safer being out there. And so started asking a couple of my friends at school to be praying and thinking about it, and the doors just didn't open up. It was interesting because where I was seeking wisdom from different rescue mission presidents and pastors, and my youth pastor from my home church here in Parker, asking for their wisdom, and they kept saying, I don't understand why, but this is something that you should do. Whereas the guys that I was asking, if they would consider going with me, when they started seeking wisdom and asking their pastors and youth pastors and people in their lives what they thought, they got a resounding no. This is not what you should do.
You were a sophomore.
That's correct.
At that time.
Yeah.
All right. How does one become homeless? I mean, usually it's forced on you by circumstances. How do you become homeless? You just strike out? You just walk into a city and sit under a bridge someplace?
That was what it became, yeah. But we actually ended up growing our hair out, growing our beards out, and really just trying to find a way to step in between our college life, the college experience that I had had, and then in order to join into the community of the homeless. So we ended up doing about a month. This is our first city. A month at the Denver Rescue Mission in their program and actually experiencing the rehabilitation that they offer to the men and women. And that was in order for us to help develop relationships and in order to start understanding more on a day-to-day basis who some of these men and women were.
Did the operators of the rescue mission know that you were experimenting?
Only one or two, as a matter of fact. We came straight into the program and just walked off the streets and asked if we could come into the mission and get some help. And they accepted us into it and allowed us to stay there for that month.
All right, and so then life began.
Yeah.
You ultimately went to 6 cities?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you moved around, mostly on the West Coast.
Yeah, that's correct. We were actually in Denver, Washington, D.C., Portland, San Francisco, Phoenix, and San Diego.
All right.
So
okay, now we've got you up to the rescue mission. What next? How do you progress with this plan?
Well, we actually ended up going to Washington, D.C. after the month in Denver. Went to Washington, D.C. and got dropped off by a friend outside of Union Station. And literally, we opened the car door, stepped out, grabbed our packs. We didn't have very many supplies. Grabbed our packs and our guitars, slammed the car door, and there we were. Didn't have any resources. I mean, we were just point blank homeless. That's
all right, what did you take with you?
Well, it was interesting. We didn't take very many items. We had a backpack that we had purchased at a thrift store for $3, and then a few supplies, one change of clothes, one sweatshirt, a sleeping bag, and a guitar. And of course, journals and Bibles and a few books, but very, very sparse resources and not very much stuff to carry around.
How much money?
We had a $25 emergency reserve that was only to be used if one of us were to get shot or stabbed and needed to make
$25.
Yeah,
that'll help a whole lot.
Exactly. But, we never went into it for food. We didn't do it for anything else. So we had zero when we stepped out. And we actually had put together a board of advisors in order to help make decisions on this. Proverbs speaks so much about, making decisions with counsel in order to ensure security and safety and victory. And so reading that, asked several different men to form this board of advisors and help us make decisions about questions like that. How long should we do this? Originally, the idea was to do it for about a year, but we ended up scaling that back to about 5-6 months. And so we had set that out. That was our goal, but it was open at the end too, when we felt like we should come off.
How many advisors did you have?
There were 8 on the board of advisors, and a youth pastor, a professor from my college, 2 rescue mission presidents, and then Sam's and my father, and actually Don Jacobson as well.
By the way, identify Sam.
Yeah, Sam, incredible guy. Was actually really good friends with my now fiance when they were growing up. And it was really interesting. We met in March, and we actually left for the streets in May. So we shook hands when Sam was down at Westmont visiting Danae and then also visiting his older brother. Shook hands in March, and we were on the streets in May. Hardly knew one another.
All right, and you got acquainted on the streets, really.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think even the time for us to be spending that together and, not having known one another with so much time. I mean, I can't tell you how long 24 hours is when there's nothing to do.
Back to back to back.
Exactly. So getting to know one another, finding out about, one another's history and what we had done when we were kids and growing up through high school and what the Lord had done and how he had led us to that point was something that we spent a lot of time doing during the day.
And your fellow students at Westmont knew about this, and many of them were praying for you.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. We had many people supporting us from my home church and from Sam's home church and from Westmont. Yeah, a lot of support.
Okay, Mike, your first night on the streets. First night under a bridge someplace. I guess that's what it was.
Yeah, we actually stepped outside of Union Station in one of the grounds right out front. We had nowhere else to go. Didn't know the city at all. So we had gone walking in the afternoon to a church that we had heard had a choir there who was giving out food. So we went there, got food for the afternoon, and then walked all the way back up to Union Station and set up our packs and just rolled out the sleeping bags, and all the cockroaches and the rats started running around, and it was just such a quick pinpoint of, man, we are here. This is real. Can't go home, can't get off the streets, can't change anything about this. Here we are.
What kind of people were around you?
There was quite a few other homeless men and women there as well, actually sleeping around some of the fountains, trying to rest up against the concrete barriers and get some protection from either the wind or from other people or
Was it
from
cold?
insects. It wasn't cold, unfortunately. I wish it had been. It's quite hot, middle of July in Washington, D.C., just roasting.
Yeah. Did they interact with you? Did they anybody say, welcome to our house? Anybody say anything to you?
As a matter of fact, yes, it was really interesting. We were wondering often whether or not people were going to, realize that we had just sort of journeyed into this homelessness, or if we were actually, legitimately homeless. It was interesting because we walked from the street into Union Station that first day, and there was a man and woman, another homeless man and woman sitting on the street corner, yelling at people as they went past. And as we walked past, they didn't see us the first time, went down into Union Station, came out about 2 hours later, and they called us over and said, hey, welcome to Washington, D.C. Where are you from? Where'd you come in from? This is a homeless man and woman. And just because we also look homeless, they're telling us where we can go for resources, where we can go to get some food, some help, where to sleep, where to stay out of. So it's a complete community that they were willing to accept us into just because we were there.
I know that Union Station very well, and the lower floor of it, the basement down there, is the largest fast food arena that I have seen. But you didn't have the money to go buy anything,
No,
did you?
you're exactly right. We actually went down into the food court and sat there, and I can remember vividly watching a little, I think 4 or 5-year-old boy. His mom had just bought him a piece of pizza, and he refused to eat the pizza. And Sam and I are sitting on a corner table, and again, no money, wishing that we could get some of the food, and you're smelling all the different courses and meals, and all the different people working behind the counters are just laying all the food on the plates. And this kid refuses to eat the piece of pizza that he has. And his mom eventually just gets frustrated and goes and throws it away. And we weren't ready at that point to get it out of the trash, but
You would have months later.
exactly right. And we ended up doing that.
Did
Because
you really eat out of garbage cans?
We did. We just didn't have the money. And when you don't have the money, and we're at the point where, geez, I'm hungry right now, and we can't make any money panhandling, so we are either going to go hungry tonight, or you know what? There was a sandwich that was just thrown away. Why don't we eat that?
Well, but you did panhandle.
We did.
Did you learn to do it?
Eventually, it took a while. It was humiliating to sit down the first night and just realize, wow, okay, I can't use any of the resources that I used to be able to. And whether or not I eat tonight is going to be whether or not people are generous in giving us different donations and different, change in their pockets as they walk past. So we sit down on the street corner, and it's a hot, again, sunny summer Washington, D.C. afternoon, prop open the guitar cases and start playing, and just, trying to get past the embarrassment of saying that, hey, we have to beg in order to survive right now. But really a crystallizing thing to see how much when a person is merciful as they walk past and willing to engage you, even though you're at that destitute position.
Yeah, did they do that? I mean, did people stop and talk to you? Did they treat you like a human being? Did they look right through you? Did they stop and show compassion to you? What reaction did you get?
All across the board. Unfortunately, the majority just walked on past. But here's something that was really interesting. Again, in Washington, D.C., as we're sort of just beginning to realize all of the intricacies of living on the streets, we sat outside of a restaurant one evening, and a young family walked past us. It was a mom and dad, and they were pushing their child in a stroller. And as they walked past, could hear the mother saying, hey, we need to, we really need to be open to the working of the Holy Spirit and the gift of giving. And she looked right down to us and then looked up and walked away really quickly. But her kid, her little child, we're on the same level as this little boy. We're sitting on the street, sitting on the sidewalk. This kid rolls past in a stroller and just locks eyes with us and just is refusing to pretend that we don't exist. See, it's interesting because as adults, we pretend that the people who do exist don't. Whereas kids, they pretend the people who don't exist do.
Yeah,
It's a complete flip.
that's well said.
Yeah, it's a complete flip. So kids would acknowledge that we were there and that we were, alive and really curious about who we were.
Now, you could have used your intuition to get people to give to you. You could have said, listen, we're students. We've run out of money. You could have done a number of things to have gotten sympathy. Did you play the game the way the homeless people play it?
Yeah, we wanted to experience it as much as we could. And obviously, I'm not homeless anymore. Neither is Sam. And many of the men and women who we became friends with on the streets are still out there. And they're going to spend the rest of their lives on the streets. So there was a fundamental difference between who we were in those situations and who those men and women were. But we wanted very much to experience what it actually was to be in their shoes and to see what it is like to be forgotten and ignored by society. So we didn't play any of the gimmicks and games that we could have in order to evoke people's mercy or their donations. We wanted to see it from that perspective.
How long did it take for you to become repulsive to people? I mean, what I've heard about the homeless is within 3 or 4 days, they can't get a job anymore. They don't smell right. They don't look right. Their clothes are dirty, and they begin to look really weird. How quickly did you? Well, I mean, I got your picture here on the cover. I'm telling you, you look scary. You really do. You got
exactly
long,
the dreadlocks,
long hair,
and the beard,
and this big beard, and you weren't able to bathe. So you had to not smell real good.
You're exactly right. And then again, in the summer in Washington, D.C., I mean, it's 90 degrees, 90% humidity plus. And so very quickly, we became pretty disgusting. I mean, just not being able to shower, and then the dirt sticks to you. We're walking all over the city, so you get the smog, the dust, the dirt, sleeping outside, having the wind blow different pieces of trash and dust across you. Very quickly, we looked pretty disgusting.
How'd you feel?
Even more disgusting. And I think even more so than that, you know how it was just so interesting because you can't smell yourself, but we became to the point we smelled so bad continuously we could smell ourselves. And it was just disgusting. I mean, it was even dehumanizing to realize I am disgusting, and Sam is as well, and nobody is relating to us at all because of what we look like, because of what we smell like, because of our situation.
There are restrooms, obviously, in the Union Station, but you were not always around public restrooms. What do homeless people do?
Well, it becomes pretty difficult. For example, one night in Portland, I became pretty sick from something that we had eaten that day and couldn't find a restroom that was open. I mean, all of the different restaurants and coffee shops had all closed down. 3 o'clock, Portland. I mean, what are you supposed to do? I actually had to end up using some bushes near a river. I mean, that was the only option, and it was sort of what it had led to. Because imagine this, okay? You are feeling disgusting, and you are having a very hard time. Maybe your family won't talk to you anymore. Maybe you've run away from your family. You don't want to talk to them, so you're alone. You're isolated. You're out in the conditions and out in just sheer nature. No protection from that. Can't get cleaned up, and on top of that, everybody who walks past you pretends like you don't exist. And so you hardly ever make eye contact with another person. When Sam and I first got back from the streets, I could not sit across a table from someone and look them in the eye when I was talking to them because for 5 months, we hadn't done that. We hadn't had a conversation. Even when we were walking together, we would walk side by side and often look at the ground because there's just no one who's willing to embrace us and say that. Every now and then, though, when a person would walk past and actually engage us, it said so much. It happened so infrequently, it changed the entire day. For a person to stop where they're going, look at us in the eye, and even just by their actions say, you're a human being made in the image of God, and I'm going to give you just 5 seconds, maybe 15, 20, 30 of my day, and by how I interact with you, change the course of your entire day.
Did you have an objective in dealing with the other people who were on the street? Were you trying to introduce them to Christ? Were you trying to show love to them? What were you trying to do on their behalf? Was it all an experiment, or were you out there representing the Lord?
It's amazing. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9:20, I try and find a common ground with everyone so that I can preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Goes on to say, to the Jew I become like the Jew, to the Gentile I become like the Gentile. We didn't go out with a specific evangelistic intention. We didn't go out saying we want to bring 50 or 100 people to Christ. It was astounding, though, how the Lord used us just in those circumstances, worked through us to engage different people and have conversations about the Lord. I remember one night in Portland, it was raining and we went underneath of a bridge in order to escape the rain, and so did quite a few other homeless men. And underneath of that bridge started playing the guitar. And whenever we were panhandling, whenever we played the guitar, we always played Christian music, worship music. And during the course of sitting underneath that bridge, got into a conversation with the guy we were sitting next to as we played a Christian song. He started smoking marijuana, started doing some other drugs as well, and, offered them to us. And because we declined, because we said, we don't drink, we don't smoke, we don't do any of that stuff, we don't do drugs. He said, well, who are you? Why are you doing this? What are you about? Why wouldn't you engage in this stuff? Don't you want to forget the rain and just not worry about it for a while? And we said, well, we don't believe that the Lord wants us to do that. He wants us to be fully engaged in what's going on in the world around us. And he said, so you mean you're Christians? He was absolutely taken aback by that. And they said, yeah, and started, continuing playing the music that we were playing. And he actually wanted to learn to play the songs that we were playing. And so just through music and through just being there in that place, God used that to touch this guy's life. It's amazing when we as Christians live and act as we're supposed to in this world, God uses that for evangelism. And we saw that on the streets in Portland.
Were you ever really frightened?
There was a time in San Francisco, actually, when we were pretty close to some severe situation. We had gathered in the front of Golden Gate Park when we first got into the city, and there were two different gangs who actually started to have a brawl. And we watched the leaders begin to go at it, and words become very heated, using a lot of profanities and getting pretty angry with one another. And then one of the leaders actually just full-on decked the other leader. And what happened was about 40 other men and women just came running and started just a huge gang fight in the center of the park. And there was one guy who was lifted up and being pulled by the two different groups. One group was trying to drag him down deeper into the park so that they could just fight without the police possibly seeing it on the street. And the other group, pulling on his feet, were his friends trying to keep him from almost certain death. And there's people just kicking him in the stomach and in the ribs, and I'm sure he had several broken ribs and just started to bleed pretty badly. And so this was a volatile place.
Life is cheap on the streets, isn't it?
Absolutely it is, unfortunately.
Well, I sure want to hear more about that, Mike. You've taken us now to, I think, the point at which you had spent 2 or 3 months on the road. By that time, you were pretty scruffy and probably pretty hungry, and on occasions, as you've said, rather afraid. And I want to take this a step further and hear how your story unfolded. Just tell us before we leave, did you ever want to bail out? Did you ever think about quitting? When you'd been there for a few months, did you ever think to yourself, well, I've now learned what I needed to learn. I think I need to go back to college. I need to go see my mom and dad. I need a shower, and I need to get a job. Did those thoughts go through your head at that point?
Absolutely. There was one night we were just drenched in a rainstorm that had hit us, and woke up at about 4 o'clock in the morning covered in mud because we'd been sleeping in a lower area, and just as the drainage came, just swept over us. And we woke up in utter disbelief, and the realization at that moment we could get out of here really quickly if we wanted to. And want a shower, want to go back to school. I'll sit through the tests, I'll sit through the class apps. But, it was just, I believe that the Lord called us to go out there for that time, and through His strength, not our own by any means, said, we can continue on this. I think we are supposed to, even though we want to bail out, we want to get out of this. Yeah. By His grace, we were able to continue on.
You never went home during that time?
Briefly, in between some of the cities, we would stop in order to meet with our board of advisors and have them check up on us and make sure we were all right. But not for a long period of time, by no means.
And what our folks have been hearing, if they tuned in late, was a young man, 22 years of age, who at that time was 20, and decided to go find out what homeless people experience, what they live like, how do they cope, and how to help them, how to minister to them. That's really what you wound up wanting to do, wasn't it?
That's
correct.
And
you had some very dramatic experiences, and we're going to hear about that next time. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for coming and telling us about it. And I admire you. And you don't look nearly as scary today as you did then. We're going to talk about some plans that you have, but I'll save that for next time. Thanks for being with us, Mike.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
What an incredible story from our guest, Mike Yankoski, here on Family Talk. Learn more about Mike's ministry or how to order a copy of his book by visiting our broadcast page at drjamesdobson.org. Did Mike Yankoski's story stir something in your heart that made you want to help the poor? Well, while you're on the broadcast page, be sure to click onto the link and search for rescue missions in your area. Again, that's drjamesdobson.org, and then go to the broadcast tab. While you're on our website, we encourage you to also check out our helpful blog posts as well. You can scroll through entries from Dr. James Dobson, Dr. Tim Clinton, and our Director of Public Policy, Jenna Ellis. Our bloggers write on issues such as parenting the rebel child, religious liberties, single living, and more. So the next time you're looking for uplifting content, read our blogs when you go to drjamesdobson.org. Finally, as you may know, the summer is a pretty tough time on nonprofit organizations, and Family Talk is no exception. We are a listener-supported ministry, and we rely solely on your financial assistance. If you can support us at this time, we would love to hear from you. You can go to drjamesdobson.org and make a tax-deductible donation online, or you can call us at 877-732-6825 and make a tax-deductible donation over the phone. Thanks so much for your prayers and your faithful financial support of Dr. James Dobson and Family Talk. I'm Roger Marsh, and I want to thank you for listening today. Remember to come back again tomorrow to hear the conclusion of Mike Yankoski's captivating conversation with Dr. James Dobson, right here, next time on Family Talk.
Family Talk is not associated with Focus on the Family.